This is a creepy panda production. Graffiti Ghouls. My buddy Mike and I always had an affinity for abandoned places. They held a hidden history, a neglected beauty within their dilapidated walls. When we heard about the old subway station beneath Brooklyn, a spot rumored among urban explorers, we knew we had to check it out. It was supposed to be covered in old graffiti, pieces from back when graffiti was the voice of the city's soul. Sneaking past a rusted gate one autumn evening, we made our way into the depths below. The city's rumble faded into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the occasional drip of water. We needed our flashlights after the first turn. The darkness down here was absolute, smothering. We walked for what felt like hours, finding incredible art. Some pieces vibrant, some ghostly, clinging to the walls like echoes of forgotten voices. Mike pointed his flashlight at a particularly impressive mural, an intricate work that depicted a pantheon of grotesque figures, humanoid but twisted, with exaggerated grins and eyes that seemed too aware. Mike was ecstatic, snapping picture after picture. This is legendary. Could be some of Banksy's earliest work, or someone equally amazing before they hit it big. I nodded in agreement, though an odd sense of unease was creeping up my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The tunnel curved and we lost sight of where we'd come in. This was the point of no return, where turning back felt just as daunting as pressing on. But Mike's enthusiasm was a whirlpool, and I, as always, got caught in its pull. We noticed the first sign of something amiss when we found fresh paint on the walls. I remember Mike's chuckle. Guess we're not the only ones sneaking down here. But the subject of this new graffiti was unsettling. More of those grotesque figures, with too sharp teeth and limbs bent at impossible angles. The images felt less like art and more like warnings. We should have turned back then, but the adrenaline high, the chase for the next piece of unseen art, drove us deeper. Then, amid the stench of old spray paint and mold, we caught a new coppery scent. Blood. It was like a physical wall, stopping us in our tracks. Mike's camera clicked in the silence, a gravestone chorus in the dark. The source wasn't hard to find. A trail of red droplets led to a patch of wall, the sight enough to dwarf every bit of thrill we had felt. Staring at us was one of those twisted figures, almost alive, painted with blood that was unmistakably fresh. The grin on its face stretched from ear to ear, and beneath it, scrawled in the same horrific pigment, one word: flesh. This wasn't the adventure we had bargained for. Mike's voice, previously filled with excitement, now barely hid its tremble. "We have to go, now." As we hurried back, a wet giggling echoed in the tunnels, the sound skittering like rats over broken glass. We quickened our pace. The art we had admired now seemed to leer at us, the oppressive darkness encroaching ever closer. Rounding a bend, the way out should have been straight ahead, but the graffiti had changed, the passages seemingly reshaped by the grotesque visions on the walls. The horrors seemed to stretch out their painted hands, as if reeling us back towards the shadows. Then everything went black. Mike's scream cut off as abruptly as our flashlights died. I stumbled, my hands meeting the cold, wet rail tracks. Panic rose like bile. A shuffling, scratching noise danced around us. No, something was circling us. In the abyss, the giggling morphed into a low, guttural chant. Flesh, flesh, flesh. My heart was a hammer against my chest. Every instinct screaming to find light, escape, anything. And then the lights flickered on. The tunnel was empty. No sign of whatever had been toying with us. Mike was beside me, his face a palette of terror. We needed no words, survival the only language we now understood. We sprinted back to the gate, never looking behind us, the murals a blur. As we emerged into the night air, gasping, the real world seemed like a foreign country. Months passed. Mike and I didn't speak much after that. The trauma had seared words from our tongues. I thought I could bury it all, pretend it had been a shared hallucination, an echo of the city's dark underbelly given life by our fear. Yet, the gasping breaths in the silence of the night, the queer shadows that flitted in the corner of my vision told a different story. Whatever we encountered in the depths of that forgotten place, it had marked us. The graffiti ghouls, if that's what they were, had seeped from the walls into our reality. Or perhaps we had stepped into theirs, and now there was no escaping it. Pavement Phantoms. Walking through the dimly lit streets of downtown Chicago at night always gave me chills. The old, imposing buildings seemed to whisper stories from a bygone era. I'm no stranger to an urban legend or two, but I'd always scoffed at the tales of haunted pavements until one autumn night changed everything. The air was crisp, and the rustle of dry leaves echoed off the nearby structures. I had just finished a late shift at the restaurant where I worked and was headed to the bus stop, a route I had taken countless times before. The city's noises always seemed distant at this hour, as if the concrete itself was trying to sleep. As I approached an underpass just before getting to the bus stop, I noticed something odd. An inexplicable fog seemed to be rising from the cracks in the pavement. I chalked it up to the sudden drop in temperature until I saw them, shadowy figures phasing in and out of existence at the edge of my vision. I tried to tell myself it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. The figures began to take on clearer shapes, and I could make out what appeared to be period clothing, their faces hollow and expressionless. Panicked, I hurried my pace, but with each step, they seemed to move closer, emerging from the very ground beneath me. A bitter wind picked up, carrying whispers that I strained to understand. Leave. Gone. Get out. The fragmented warning sent me into a full sprint. I didn't stop until I reached the bustling safety of the bus stop, with its glaring fluorescent lights and a few late-night passengers. The phantoms were gone, but their chilling presence lingered. It took all I had not to look back at the underpass as I boarded the bus. Upon getting home, I scoured the internet for stories or news about hauntings in that area, but I found nothing. The following day, I felt compelled to visit the local library and comb through old city records, and that's when I stumbled upon a chilling piece of history that explained my frightful encounter. During the late 1800s, a portion of downtown Chicago was razed to construct newer buildings, and in the process, they unceremoniously paved over an old pauper's cemetery. The records hinted at unrest and strange sightings throughout the years, incidents hushed up to avoid panic. It seemed I had crossed a forgotten grave, now hidden below layers of urban development. From then on, I made a habit of staying far away from the underpass, taking longer, more populated routes to my bus stop after work. The whispers never returned, but the sight of fog crawling from the pavement would cause my heart to skip a beat every time. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I was in that part of the city. Begrudgingly, I started to share my story with others, and a few people came forward with their encounters, each consistent with my own. It appeared I wasn't the only one who had come face to face with the Pavement Phantoms. We cautiously acknowledged that these restless spirits were a part of our history, ones that refused to be forgotten with time. Months later, as I passed the area during daylight with a friend, I saw construction crews breaking ground near the underpass for a new project. Concern washed over me, wondering if disturbing the sight would reawaken the phantoms for others to witness, or worse, provoke a darker, more violent response from the specters entombed below the city streets. The thought of innocent laborers and pedestrians encountering these ghosts filled me with dread. I decided to take action. I reached out to local historians and insisted that the city acknowledge the past and protect the workers. After much persistence, they agreed to conduct a careful excavation to honor the disturbed graves. Surprisingly, the city took the findings seriously. They halted construction, and a small memorial park was erected to acknowledge the history beneath. I attended the ceremony with a heavy heart, offering respect to the lost souls. Since then, no more whispers or apparitions plagued me, and peace seemed to have been restored. Though the Pavement Phantoms seemed to have been appeased, I'd never walk the streets of downtown Chicago at night without remembering their eerie faces and pleas. It was a chilling reminder that history lies beneath our feet, and sometimes it claws its way back into the present. Rooftop Rattler. Late summer breezes whispered through the streets of Brooklyn, carrying the rhythmic chaos of the city up to the rooftop where my friends and I gathered. An annual tradition, we'd meet atop my old apartment building, swapping stories over beers and the backdrop of a charcoal horizon. Tonight, however, had a tinge of the unfamiliar, a sense of unease as the shadows seemed to cling a little tighter to the edges of our concrete perch. We were 5, Joey, Clara, Mark, Liz, and me. Mark, ever the fan of urban legends, began recounting tales of an enigmatic creature said to lurk on the rooftops of New York. The so-called Rooftop Rattler, a specter of urban myth, was whispered about by the superstitious. Kids claimed it was a monstrous snake with a taste for those who wandered roofs at night. "Just stories," Mark insisted, laughing it off, but an involuntary shiver rippled through our group. As the night deepened, our laughter dimmed, stifled by the persistent feeling that we weren't alone. It might have been the beer or just Mark's story getting to me, but soon I noticed a subtle noise distinct from the city's drone, a faint but unmistakable scraping sound. I glanced around to see if anyone else noticed it, but they were engrossed in conversation. Trying to dismiss it, I focused on the laughter and the warmth of friends. Then the thud. It was as if the very air was punched out of us, the joviality evaporating instantaneously. Everyone heard it, a rhythmic, heavy pounding. Not the erratic pitter-patter of footsteps, but something deliberate, something insidious. Joey went first toward the edge of the building to check, chuckling nervously about how we were getting worked up over nothing. We reluctantly trailed behind him, straining to peer over the edge. The roof next door lay barren under the moonlit sky, the eerie thud seeming to emanate from there. Joey, after a quick, fruitless scan of the area, shrugged and turned back toward us, trying to seem at ease. It was then that I spied something move, a fluid darkness against the darkness of the neighboring roof, a subtle, undulating silhouette that made my blood run cold. I barely managed a hoarse whisper, "Guys, look!" But before the words fully left my mouth, the creature rose, revealing itself in a display of malevolence. Its body, convulsing like electricity, had animated its scaly hide. Almost serpent-like, but massive, it spiraled upwards, a contorted tower of muscle and malice. The Rooftop Rattler wasn't just an urban legend. It was real, and it was right there, mere feet from us. A collective gasp, a shared moment of terror. None of us could move. Suddenly, Mark broke the paralysis, yelling for us to get inside. We stumbled over each other, scrambling toward the roof's door. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the lock. Behind us, the slithering sound grew louder, closer. It was as if the creature was mocking our feeble attempts at escape with its relentlessness. Finally, the door gave way, and we burst into the stairwell, not daring to look back. We didn't stop running until we reached my apartment, 2 floors down. Slamming the door shut, panting, we could barely process what had just happened. But madness loomed in the back of our eyes. No one had to say it. Reality as we knew it had fractured. The idea of calling the cops seemed nonsensical. Who would believe us? Instead, we sat in silence, listening for a sign that we hadn't just imagined the whole ordeal. Hours ticked by with no sound from above, our nerves frayed to threads. Then, with the false courage of encroaching dawn, curiosity overcame fear. "We have to know," Liz said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nods of agreement met her words, and we found ourselves drawn back up, like moths to a flame, needing to confirm it wasn't some collective hysteria. Slowly, we reascended the stairwell. Reaching the rooftop, we saw no immediate sign of the creature. I took hesitant steps forward, my eyes darting for any hint of movement. The city seemed to hold its breath with me. With shaking legs, I approached the spot where the monster had appeared, staring at the adjacent rooftop, now bathed in the amber hues of sunrise. There was nothing out of the ordinary, yet the air still held that sinister chill. I heard Clara gasp and spun around to see what had caught her attention. There, among the shadows cast by the rising sun, lay a large, shimmering scale, iridescent and terrible in its implications. It was real. "Let's never speak of this," I said, voice wavering. No one disagreed. As we retreated back to the world below, our pact was silent but unanimous. Still, the city's whispers felt different now. They knew, as did we, the Rooftop Rattler was more than just a story. Shadowy Staircase. Staring at the decrepit staircase, something about it made my skin crawl. Long abandoned, the house had stood untouched on Old Mill Road, a relic from an era most people in Marrittsville wanted to forget. Kids would dare each other to go in, but nobody ever took it seriously. That is until my reckless curiosity got the better of me. My name's Jess, and I have a thing for the macabre. Something about that staircase, shadowed even in daylight, beckoned me. I remember pushing open the creaking front door, the stale air hitting my nostrils with the musty smell of decay. The staircase stood like a sentinel. Its wood looked solid, strangely inviting. The first step groaned under my weight, as if warning me of the folly of my adventure. I hesitated, considering the stories I'd heard of the place, unexplained disappearances, muffled cries in the night, and the all-encompassing shadow that was said to envelop anyone who trespassed. Against my better judgment, I continued up the stairs, each step protesting my presence. Halfway up, a chill ran down my spine. It was as though the air around me had frozen, despite it being a warm summer day outside. The shadows seemed to creep closer, drawn to me like moths to a flame. With the nearest window boarded up, I couldn't tell if the darkness was playing tricks on my eyes or if it was closing in on me, tangible and thick. Reaching the top, I found a hallway. The walls were lined with portraits, eyes seemingly following my every move. The entire house felt alive, watching and waiting. One particular photo caught my eye, a family standing rigidly, their expressions not one of pride but of terror. It chilled me to the bone. The further I walked, the colder it got, and a sense of dread settled in my stomach. The hardwood beneath my feet creaked ominously with each step, harmonizing with a low whistling sound echoing through the hollow space. It was then I heard it, a soft sobbing coming from the last door on the left. Compelled by some morbid need to know, I approached it. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, the metal ice cold to the touch. Pushing the door open, I was met with nothingness. The room beyond was impossibly dark, darker than the inside of the house, darker than any night I'd ever experienced. A void. From deep within that darkness, the sobs continued, now joined by a whisper, "Leave while you can." I should have turned back right then and there, but my legs moved of their own volition, carrying me into the black. That's when it happened. The shadow surged forward, materializing into a form so sinister I could barely comprehend it. It was as though the house's very soul had been tainted and twisted into something grotesque. The darkness enveloped me, and I no longer stood within the room, but within a void, entirely removed from reality. I could feel its hunger, an insatiable need that fed on fear and despair. The sobs had turned to wails, piercing the silence, clawing at my sanity. Somehow I found it within me to flee, stumbling blindly back to the doorway. But every step seemed only to draw me deeper into its grasp. The shadow clung to me, thick and suffocating. I knew that if I stopped, even for a second, I'd be lost forever, consumed by whatever haunted this place. With the faintest glimmer of light from the stairwell, I lunged toward it, tumbling down the stairs, the world a blur of pain and terror. As I reached the bottom, the shadow's hold weakened, and I managed to crawl towards the front door, gasping for air. Outside, the bright afternoon sunlight blinded me, a stark contrast to the depths from which I'd emerged. My body ached, my mind raced, and my heart felt like it might burst from my chest. Lying in the grass, I watched as the dark presence receded into the house, the doorway nothing more than an ordinary entrance once more. People passed by but didn't stop, unaware of the otherworldly horror lurking just behind the walls. No one spoke of the staircase again, and no one went inside. The house was razed soon after, but even now at night, I swear I can hear the staircase creaking, feel the shadows pressing close. Sometimes, I wake up breathing heavily, drenched in sweat, convinced that this isn't over, that the shadow awaits, biding its time, somewhere out there beyond the world of the living. Subway Specter. Every evening, the subway felt like a second home, with the familiar mechanical hum and muted conversations. The tunnels of the New York City subway system stretched like veins under the bustling city, connecting lives and stories in an intricate web. My routine was simple. Clock out from the late shift at the diner, head to the 34th Street station, catch the midnight train to Brooklyn, and walk the last few blocks to my small apartment. One unremarkable Tuesday night blurred into the routine. The platform was nearly empty, save for a few night owls and a homeless man curled up in the corner. There was this chill in the air, a bit odd for an underground station, but I didn't pay it much mind. The train was late. 5 minutes turned to 10, then 15. Impatience bubbled inside me as I tapped my foot against the grimy platform floor. Finally, the lights of an arriving train pierced the darkness. Doors slid open with a sigh, revealing a strangely deserted carriage. As I stepped inside, the frigid air inside the train car bit at my skin. It was bizarre. Trains are rarely without a stray commuter or two, but this train was silent, save for the hum of its engines. I reassured myself that it could be a newly commissioned car, possibly even cleaner, devoid of the day's wear and tear. I chose a seat by the window and pulled out my phone, the screen's glow the only comforting light. The train lurched forward, plunging into the tunnel towards Brooklyn. I settled into the rhythm of the train, the rattle and sway that I'd long since grown accustomed to. A few stops passed in this solitude when out of the corner of my eye I noticed something shifting on the periphery of the shadows. Lifting my gaze from my phone, I scanned the car. Nothing seemed amiss, so I attributed it to my weary eyes yearning for sleep. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, as if the walls themselves were confiding in me. I perked up, my body tensing, trying to locate the source. The whispers grew in number, an unintelligible chorus of hisses and sighs. The temperature dropped further, each breath visible in the frigid air as my heart pounded in a regular rhythm. Panic threatened to root me in place. The spectral whispers creased into a recognizable pattern, the utterance of a name, Eleanor. I knew no Eleanor, yet the name clung to the atmosphere, charged with an unseen energy. Through the reflection in the glass, I caught a glimpse of someone else, a figure in an outdated dress, hair piled high upon her head. I spun around, but the seat behind me was empty. Dread seeped down my spine, warm against the cold. I returned to the window, the reflection still there. Eleanor, I realized, the ghostly whisper of her name suddenly filled with significance. She raised a hand as if beseeching me, and I froze. At that moment, the train halted abruptly, the lights flickering and dying, leaving us in pitch darkness. The whispers crescendoed around me, almost demanding attention. I dared not breathe, let alone move. The emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie red glow throughout the car. Eleanor, or the specter that bore her name, was now seated opposite me, her gaze hollow. The whispers had hushed, but her presence filled the space with an electric unease. "I didn't want to die," she murmured, her voice thin as air, her era-specific garb marked with the grim vestiges of underground grime. It followed me, wouldn't let me be. Questions spiraled in my head, a whirlpool of fear and fascination. What followed you? My voice barely made it past my lips. The darkness, it crawls, consumes. Her lips twisted, and for an instant, a shadow loomed behind her, then dispersed into nothing. My hands were numb, but I managed to type a quick search on my phone. Subway Death, Eleanor 1920s. The articles flew by until I was staring at a grainy photograph of the woman sitting across from me. Eleanor Rigby, a young woman who fell onto the tracks, struck down by an oncoming train in the same year her dress belonged to. A tragic fate now etched into the spectral lines of her face. I was trapped in the paradox of wanting to flee and needing to understand. "How can I help you?" I asked, my soul the heaviest it had ever been. "Break the cycle. It's the train, the endless ride. I can't get off. It never stops, not really," she explained, or perhaps pleaded. "Free me, please." The lights flickered again, and the train rumbled back to life. Eleanor's image started to fade, the whispers rising once more. A plan ignited in my mind to unsuspectingly pull the emergency brake, disrupting the perpetual journey. Acting on impulse, I leapt from my seat, plunging towards the brake. With a sharp tug, the train screeched to a halt, the violence of the stop almost throwing me to the floor. When the dust settled, I was alone once more, no Eleanor, no whispers. An eerie silence hung over the cabin, but somehow it felt lighter. The train continued, and when I finally disembarked at my stop, the first light of dawn had begun to creep into the sky. Days turned into weeks, and I never saw Eleanor or felt the chill again. Some nights, as I ride the same midnight train, I wonder if she found her peace or if she just moved on to another car, an eternal passenger on the subway's spectral rails. But deep down, a feeling of calm reassures me. Maybe, just maybe, I had set the subway specter free.